John 14:21. After saying these things, Jesus was troubled in his spirit and testified, "Truly, truly, I say to you, one of you will betray me." The disciples looked at one another, uncertain of whom he spoke. One of his disciples, whom Jesus loved, was reclining at table at Jesus' side. So Simon Peter motioned to him to ask Jesus of whom he was speaking. So that disciple, leaning back against Jesus, said to him, "Lord, who is it?" I was reading this morning, you guys, out of Lisa Harper's devotional, and this one, because I was just thinking about, today being February 14th, and love and all that good stuff. And so I decided to kind of look back on one that I had already read, and it is titled "Jesus is Accessibly Affectionate." And she goes into that verse, and talking about how John, the beloved, who refers to himself as the one Jesus loved, was leaning back against Jesus at the Last Supper when he was just a teenager. And as a matter of fact, she says, according to Jewish tradition, it was his youth which allowed him to quiz Jesus in the first place, because ceremony dictated that the youngest person present at the Passover meal got to ask the questions. How cool is that? And so she says, then at the end of John's Gospel in chapter 21, in the very place where an author typically listed his credentials to prove the legitimacy of the text, John avoids his credentials, and instead he describes himself as the one who leaned against Jesus. Most scholars think John wrote his gospel account in his latter years, when he was maybe in his 60s, which means that this physical embrace with Jesus, which happened approximately 40 years earlier, is what defined him. Unfortunately, unlike John the Beloved, far too many of us now emulate the posture of most folks in Jerusalem back then, whom Jesus described as hesitant to be held. And this is in Luke 13:34. "Jerusalem, Jerusalem, who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you are not willing." And she goes on to say, we were created to be held by God. Instead, we settle for a brief pat on the back from a coworker or a wave from another driver in the carpool line. We were created to be heard by God. Instead, we settle for a few likes on social media. We were created to be healed by God. Instead, we settle for medicating ourselves with busyness, alcohol, fast food, or binge watching our favorite show. I wonder how many times a day Jesus affectionately leans towards me, yet I foolishly arch away into distracted isolation. And she asked, "How about you?" And I thought this was so good because she later, there's always some discussion questions at the end, and one was, with regard to your relationship with Jesus, would you describe yourself as being more independent and, quote, hesitant to be held, or more like the Apostle John, who leaned fully into Jesus's embrace? And then the last question is, when is the last time that you felt held by Jesus? And I can honestly say, you guys, that I will say that it was probably one of the times I can specifically remember was last April. It was the day that Gage and Maddie got married, the most beautiful day. I mean, a gorgeous day in Montana. And Jimmy and I were out to dinner that night, and we were sitting there, and just there was a lot of emotions that I think we both were feeling. And I'm going to tell you, when it's your youngest, and there's something about a boy and his mama. It's tough, y'all. And for you mamas that are already and kind of around the same age I am, I mean, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. And even if it's, say, not a boy and it's your girl, that's tough too. So we were sitting there that night, and I just remember we were in this like restaurant, and it was like a lounge downstairs, and there was a gal that was playing guitar, and there was literally one other table of some ladies that were in this restaurant. And I sat there, and Jimmy and I just holding hands, like just talking to each other and just kind of reminiscing on the whole day. And y'all, I'd already shared a lot of tears because I had wrote Gage and Maddie a letter just kind of telling them how happy I was for them, how much I loved them, and just all the stuff. And so I was totally in my feelings. But I sat there, and I remember looking over to the right on the wall, and where they would have, like, you know, the meal of the day, the drink of the day, and it just caught my eye because it was this big chalkboard. And I looked over, and it had drink of the day, and it was Georgia on my mind. And it was some peach kind of drink. And I was like, that's crazy. Like, that's kind of like been my real estate slogan that I've kind of used like the last several years. So of course that was the first thing that kind of got my attention. But then as we started talking, and the girl that was singing that night, her name was Hannah. And she's got the most beautiful voice, and later found out that our own Jason Horde at Christ Chapel like produced her album, and I'll tell you about that. That was crazy. But you know, I sat there and saw that what her name was, and I was like, oh, Hannah, that's special, you know. And so, and we sit there talking, and she starts to play one of my absolute favorite Keith Urban songs, and it was Raining on Sunday. And I was like, oh my gosh, she's playing my favorite song, like one of my very favorite songs. And then it's like she went into another like artist, like I think it was George Strait, you know, one of my next favorite people. And then it was like another, even at one point I told Jimmy, I said, if she plays Keith Whitley next, you know, and she did. And so it was just one after the other. And I sat there, and in that moment, I literally became like so aware and almost overwhelmed that the Lord knew my heart. He saw that I was happy, but I also was feeling some mama sadness, I'd call it. And it's like he was doing all of this to make me smile and to make me know that he saw me. And what was even more crazy is when Jimmy ended up asking Hannah where she was going to be playing at the next night, and she said something about her brother was going to be playing with her. And so she mentioned that her brother played the dobro and all this. And so I'm asking Jimmy, okay, what is that instrument? And he was like, you remember like when we went and saw Jason play like at Christmas, that guy was playing it? And he said Jason Horde's name, and she heard it, and she was like, wait a minute, who did you say? Like, do you know Jason Horde? And we're like, we do know Jason Horde. And she was like, he produced my album. And we were like, this is crazy. I mean, here we are in Whitefish, Montana, y'all. And here's all of this happening. And somebody that literally had their album produced by somebody that we know personally and we go to church with. And I just was like, wow, there is sometimes just way too many coincidences. And I don't even call them that anymore, because I now realize that if you will be a little more quieter and just a little more aware, the Lord is showing you all day long that he sees you. And there's so many specific things that he can show you where there's not a doubt that you know that he is aware of you, he sees you, and he loves you. So I just felt so strong this morning to just talk about this and tell you all this story. It's one that's very special to my heart. And but if you feel like you're not seen, know that you are, because he will show you if you ask him. And I have no doubt in my mind of that. So I love you guys. I just wanted to share that with y'all. And I hope you have a great day and that you really lean into the Lord and just let him show you how much he loves you. Because he does. He loves you so much.